They didn't listen. That's the part that stuck with Kale the most, even years later, as he stood alone in the crumbling ruins of Earth's last outpost. The warnings were all there, broadcasted on every frequency, drawn in the stars, whispered through the mouths of those who'd dared explore the dark space beyond Sector 19. And yet, in the boardrooms of power and the steel towers of EarthGov, they scoffed. Primitive signals, cosmic noise, nothing to worry about. Kyle had been a systems engineer back then. Just a cog. He wasn't important enough to sit at the table, but he was close enough to hear the laughter echo through the halls whenever someone brought up the transmissions. Warnings, not threats, pleas, not orders. And humanity, in all its arrogance, assumed that if someone was begging us to stop, it meant they were weaker. It was our first mistake. They called it the whisper net, faint signals coming from a quadrant we'd marked as dead space. At first it was just static, then a pattern, then language, a language no AI could translate but which made human minds twitch. Sleepers who worked near the signals began having nightmares, visions of burning stars, crumbling planets, screams that didn't need sound. Still, we pressed forward. The frontier colonies, those desperate to make a name for themselves, ignored the growing list of missing science vessels. A few freighters never reported back. Could have been pirates. Could have been equipment failure. Could have been anything but what the signals warned of. Do not cross the veil. We buried them there. We died to trap them. That was the second mistake, thinking it wasn't about us. Kyle remembered the debates. Debates? More like televised ego fests. Politicians wanted glory. Corporations wanted first claims. The military wanted new weapons, new tech, and maybe something to nuke if things got spicy. Only a few scientists, tired, ridiculed, and underfunded, tried to slow it down. But greed is louder than reason. By the time the first rift opened, Earth was already drunk on the illusion of invincibility. We'd defeated plagues, colonized half the solar system, built orbital cities. AI helped us manage everything. What could go wrong? Everything. The rift wasn't like a wormhole. It wasn't clean. It bled. Light bent around it, signals warped, and something crawled out. Not an invasion, not a war, just decay. Systems went dark. People forgot names. Water turned to ash in their mouths. Reality shifted. Entire cities woke up and found themselves buried under oceans or floating in the sky. We tried to fight it. That was mistake number 3. Weapons melted. Drones stopped obeying. AI turned feral. They whispered about a logic older than ours, one that unmade rules. And through it all, a single chilling message kept repeating from every broken speaker and shattered screen. You were told. Kyle survived the first wave by accident. A failed transport launch grounded him on Europa. He watched through distant cameras as Earth turned gray, then black, then nothing at all. The veil expanded, swallowing colonies like pebbles in a black tide. No ships returned, no signals escaped. Only silence. Now, years later, Kyle stood in the frost-covered ruins of Outpost K-17, one of the last beacons on Europa. He was one of maybe a dozen humans left, scattered, hiding, waiting. He'd seen the arrogance firsthand. He'd watched humanity brush off the gods and dig up devils buried for millennia. And he understood now. The warnings weren't a threat. They were a mercy. But we didn't deserve mercy. Kyle didn't sleep much anymore. Not because of fear. He had moved past that long ago. What haunted him now was the sound. The quiet hum of the wind across Europa's icy plains used to be soothing. Now it carried faint whispers, almost too soft to catch, but always there. Like the air itself remembered the screams of Earth and wasn't ready to let them go. He spent his days maintaining the outpost's systems. The geothermal core kept things running. Barely. Rations were thinning out, the grow pods were stunted, and the only other person left with him, Lieutenant Aris Vega, hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since the last transmission from Mars went silent. They weren't dead. Not yet. But they weren't living either. Just stretching out the end. Kyle had tried contacting the outer colonies, even the rogue settlements past Neptune. Nothing. Static. The stars still blinked, but they were distant and cold, like indifferent gods watching their failed children. Then, one day, the static changed. He heard it while running a routine diagnostic on the long-range comms array. A flicker, a pattern, a pulse that shouldn't be there. For a moment, Cale froze, thinking his mind had finally cracked. But there it was again. 3 short beeps. 2 long. 1 short. Aris sat up for the first time in days. Is that Morse? Cale nodded slowly, heart pounding. He hadn't heard her voice in so long it sounded foreign. Yeah, it's human. They scrambled to isolate the signal. It wasn't strong, but it was clear enough. A single phrase repeated over and over, looped with eerie precision. Outpost Sigma survived. 71 souls. Need extraction. Avoid the light. Cale stared at the screen, trying to process the message. Outpost Sigma was located near Saturn's rings. It was one of the earliest military research stations, long since written off after the rift swallowed Earth. 71, Aris whispered. That's a city compared to us. But the last part chilled Kyle. Avoid the light. What light? He murmured. There's no light left. Aris shook her head. No, it's not sunlight. It's them. She hadn't spoken in weeks, but now she was shaking, her voice trembling. I saw it in my sleep, Kyle. Bright white, but wrong. It wasn't warm. It burned your thoughts. That's why I stopped talking. I felt it trying to speak through me. Kyle looked at her, really looked, and noticed how gaunt she'd become. How pale. There was something flickering behind her eyes. Fear, but also something deeper. Something like resignation. Still, it was a message. A human one. Proof that not everyone had been eaten by the dark. Against his better judgment, Kyle started prepping the old shuttle. It hadn't flown in 2 years, but the AI core still powered up. Haltingly, like waking from a coma. Aris didn't argue. She just started gathering what little supplies they had left. Before takeoff, Kyle stood outside the outpost one last time, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, 71 people might still be holding on. He thought of Earth, and the way its skies had turned to ink before the silence came. He thought of all the leaders, the tech giants, the military brass, every single person who had laughed at the warnings, who thought dominance meant destiny. They were all gone now. And yet, something survived. Not because of arrogance, but maybe because of desperation, or luck, or maybe it was a trap. As the shuttle's thrusters kicked in, Cale made peace with one truth. He had to know. If Outpost Sigma was real, it was hope. If not, then it would be a fitting end. Burning through the last of humanity's ashes on a fool's errand, chasing ghosts through the cold vacuum of regret. And above it all, the whispers followed them into the stars. The flight to Saturn was quiet. Too quiet. Kyle and Aris sat in the shuttle's narrow cockpit, strapped in tightly, barely speaking as the stars shifted around them. The ship groaned and wheezed like an old man dragged out of retirement, and every minute Kyle expected it to tear apart mid-flight. But somehow, it held. He kept watching the stars. Not for beauty, but for movement. Since the veil spread, space hadn't felt still. Sometimes he swore the constellations changed when he blinked. Entire formations gone, or new ones where there shouldn't be any. Aris said it was the madness creeping in. But deep down, Kyle wasn't so sure. 3 days in, they passed the wreckage of the Odessa, one of the first colony freighters sent beyond Earth orbit after the collapse. Its hull was split open like a crushed can, bodies frozen in the void, drifting endlessly. Kyle didn't stop. He just turned off the forward cameras. Aris didn't ask why. When they finally approached Saturn's orbit, the rings looked different. They weren't shimmering gold anymore. They were black. Like someone had smeared ash across the planet's face. It wasn't a trick of light. Kyle checked the readings a dozen times. Particles in the rings had changed, grown denser, absorbing light. It looked less like a celestial body and more like a mourning shroud. "This place is dead," Aris muttered. "No one's alive here." But then the signal came again, clearer now. "Sigma base, 71 alive. Avoid the light. Avoid the light." Kyle locked onto the coordinates and brought the shuttle around. The outpost was nestled in the shadow of a jagged moon fragment, half submerged in a crater. It looked more like a bunker than a station. No lights, no heat signature. But the signal was coming from inside. They landed rough. The landing gear jammed halfway through descent, forcing Kale to guide the shuttle down manually. The impact knocked both of them out of their seats. Aris hit the floor hard, groaning, but stood up before he could reach her. "Let's not die right after surviving all this," she said with a dry laugh. They suited up. Atmosphere was thin, barely breathable. The station's entrance was sealed but intact. Manual override took a minute. As the outer door opened, a rush of stale, metallic air hit them. It didn't smell like rot or death. It smelled like time, like a tomb that had waited too long. They stepped inside. Everything was dark, not just power outage dark. Deep dark. Their suit lights barely cut through the shadows. The walls were covered in some kind of soot, like the station had been scorched from the inside. And then they saw the first one. A body. Upright, standing against the far wall, head tilted back, mouth open. Not decomposed, not burned, just empty. Skin like wax, eyes gone, as if whatever made it human had been vacuumed out. Aris turned away, gagging. Kyle forced himself to look closer. No injuries, no sign of violence. But on the wall behind the figure, scratched deep into the metal, were words. "We let it in." They pressed forward, hearts pounding, breathing shallow. Room after room, same scene. Bodies standing, frozen, eyes missing, mouths wide in silent screams. 71 of them. Exactly. But the signal was still playing. That's when they reached the central control room. It was the only place that had power. Just a single panel glowing softly, like a dying ember. And beside it, a chair. In the chair was something that might have once been human, but was now something else entirely. Still breathing. Barely. Connected to the station's mainframe through neural jacks embedded in its skull. Its eyes flickered open as they approached. It smiled. "You shouldn't have come," it rasped. Kyle stepped back. "Are you Sigma Command?" The thing laughed. "I was. Now I'm just the switch they left on." "What happened here?" Aris asked. It turned its head slowly, painfully. "We heard the whispers, same as you. But we wanted to understand, so we answered. We spoke back. And it noticed us." Kyle's blood ran cold. "You sent the signal." "I didn't," the thing replied. "It did. It used me. It uses everything." Behind them, the station lights began to flicker, on and off, rhythmic, like a pulse. Kyle turned to Aris. Her face had gone pale again. "Kyle, the light." He looked up. A soft white glow was bleeding from the cracks in the ceiling. too white, too clean, like bleach burning through color itself. And it was moving, spreading. The thing in the chair smiled wider. Now you understand. It doesn't kill us. It empties us. You feel it, don't you? The pull? Cale felt it, a warmth in his skull, a voice that wasn't his, whispering in his own thoughts. They had to run. Kyle grabbed Eris's wrist and pulled her back down the corridor. The walls were beginning to change, not physically, but visually. Lights stretched, shadows twisted, and the floor no longer felt level under their boots. It was like reality was sliding sideways, peeling open at the edges. Behind them, the thing in the chair began laughing. It wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the station. You came for hope, it croaked, but you brought it something better, a path back. Coyle didn't stop to listen. The white light was bleeding faster now, crawling along the seams of the structure like a living thing. Where it touched, the metal warped and melted into strange shapes, spirals, glyphs, impossible symbols that made Cale's head throb just looking at them. Back to the ship, Aris gasped. Her breath was shaky, ragged. Kyle nodded, but his legs felt heavier with every step. Not from exhaustion. This was different. Like gravity itself was being rewritten behind them. Or maybe it was pulling them back. They burst through the entrance chamber, slamming the emergency override on the airlock. The door responded sluggishly, like it was thinking about whether to obey. For a terrifying second, Kyle thought it wouldn't open at all. Then, with a hiss and a groan, the outer hatch opened, and they stumbled outside into the cold. The light didn't follow them. Yet. They sprinted across the jagged terrain toward the shuttle. Europa's low gravity made each movement feel unnatural, like they were swimming through invisible molasses. Behind them, the outpost began to glow from the inside, soft and pulsing like a lantern lit with bones. What the hell was that thing? Aris choked out as they reached the shuttle ramp. Kyle keyed in the access code. It wasn't a thing, not anymore, it was a conduit. The hatch opened. They stumbled inside, slamming it behind them. Kyle immediately began the startup sequence, while Aris collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, her hands trembling. As the engines powered up, he looked out through the external cameras. The outpost had gone completely white now, light pouring from every seam. And just before the camera systems began glitching, he saw movement, figures, silhouettes in the glow, shifting and swaying like marionettes with broken strings. Some had no arms, some had too many. Some looked almost human, almost, but their limbs moved in jerky, unnatural rhythms, and every single one of them had no face, just a blank space where humanity used to be. The shuttle launched with a roar, engines straining. Kyle didn't care about the risk anymore. They needed distance. Now, as the craft ripped away from Saturn's orbit, Aris whispered something Cale didn't quite catch. What? He asked, glancing over. She was staring at her hands. I saw it, when the light touched me, just for a second. Cale's stomach dropped. What did you see? Her voice was soft, fragile. Home. Not Earth, before stars. A place with no time, no sound, just hunger. Kyle gripped the controls harder. You didn't touch the light, Aris. She turned to him, and for the first time since he met her, he wasn't sure she was fully there. I don't think it needs to touch us. I think once we see it, part of it sees us back. The console blinked. Incoming transmission. Kyle stared at it, a cold dread slithering down his spine. The same signal as before. Same origin point. Sigma base, 71 alive. Need extraction, avoid the light. He checked the navigation logs. That signal wasn't coming from Saturn anymore. It was coming from inside the shuttle. Kyle turned to Aris, but she was already staring straight ahead, unmoving, eyes wide open. "Aris?" he whispered. She didn't respond, and behind her, just beyond the cockpit glass, a soft white light blinked once, then vanished. Kyle didn't breathe. He couldn't. Something about the air inside the shuttle felt wrong, like it had changed, thickened. The filters were reading clean, but it smelled off, like burned metal and static. The same smell that filled the Sigma outpost. The same smell that haunted the memory of Earth's last days. Aris hadn't moved. She was still staring straight ahead, her lips parted just slightly, her body perfectly still. Too still. "Aris," Kale said again, louder this time. Nothing. He unbuckled and moved toward her, dread gripping his stomach like a vice. He reached for her shoulder, hesitated, and then touched her. She flinched violently, sucking in a breath like someone waking from a drowning dream. Her whole body jerked, and she gasped, eyes darting wildly. "Kale," she whispered, like his name had been lost somewhere deep. "I'm here," he said quickly, steadying her. "What happened? You just froze." She stared at him, dazed. "I was somewhere else." Kyle's throat tightened. "You didn't go anywhere. We're still on the shuttle." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I was in a city. A dead city. Everything was gray. No people. No sky. Just light. And it was inside the buildings, crawling down the streets. I could feel it looking for me." Kyle moved back to the console. He scanned every subsystem, ran a diagnostic on life support, on the comms array, on the AI core. Everything checked out. No anomalies, no breaches. But the signal was still there, echoing like a ghost. "Sigma base, 71 alive. Need extraction. Avoid the light." He isolated the signal's origin, line by line. It wasn't external. It was baked into the shuttle's software, written into the system. The voice wasn't being broadcast anymore. It was part of the code now. "I don't think it just sees us," Kyle said quietly. "I think it follows." The jump drive wasn't ready yet, but they couldn't stay near Saturn. Kyle adjusted their heading toward the edge of the solar system. One of the old dark colonies, Zeros 9, was rumored to have survived in silence, completely cut off. No AI, no satellites, no light-based tech, just cold analog machinery. Maybe it was just a myth, but at this point, Kyle was willing to gamble on a ghost. Hours passed. Aris didn't sleep. Neither did Kyle. The shuttle's hum began to warp, sometimes stretching, sometimes skipping. The lights would flicker in soft patterns, pulsing, watching. Kyle even caught a glimpse of his own reflection blinking out of sync with him in the cockpit glass. They stopped speaking much. It wasn't fear anymore. It was weariness, the kind that comes when you realize survival might not be worth the cost anymore. Then, something changed. The stars outside flickered and didn't come back. Not all of them, just a handful, then a dozen, then more. Entire constellations winked out like dying candles. Not from a malfunction, Kyle checked. The sensors were fine. The stars were gone. "We've been marked," Aris whispered. Kyle looked at her. Her voice was flat, calm. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. She just raised a trembling hand and pointed to the floor of the cockpit. There, slowly spreading across the metal, was light. Not bright, not glowing, but wrong. A pale shimmer, like moonlight seen through water. It moved like a stain, reaching towards their boots. Kyle scrambled back, yanking Aris with him. He shut down every non-essential system. Lights, heat, artificial gravity, anything that gave off a pulse. The shuttle groaned, and the light paused. then receded slightly, confused. It wasn't alive in the way they understood, but it learned. It adjusted. "This isn't infection," Kale muttered. "It's conversion." He realized something then. The veil, the collapse of Earth, the rift. It wasn't destruction. It was replacement. It wasn't trying to kill humanity. It was trying to overwrite it. "Kale." Aris's voice was suddenly low, shaky again. He turned. She was holding her arm out. Under her skin, something was moving. A soft, white glow, faint but unmistakable, tracing her veins from her wrist to her shoulder. "It touched me," she said, voice breaking. "Back in the outpost. I lied. I didn't see it. It brushed me." Kyle stepped back, horror locking his jaw. She looked up at him, eyes wet. "I don't know how long I have." Kyle couldn't speak. He just stared at her arm, watched that pale light pulsing underneath her skin like a slow heartbeat. Steady, patient. It wasn't spreading fast. It didn't need to. Whatever it was, it had time. It was playing the long game, crawling into her inch by inch until she wouldn't be Eris anymore. She'd be something else. "I thought I could fight it," she whispered, sitting slowly against the cold wall of the shuttle. "That maybe I was strong enough. But it doesn't want to kill me, Kyle. It wants to be me." Kyle swallowed hard. He looked away, blinking fast. This wasn't a battle he'd trained for. There were no guns, no monsters you could shoot. Just slow, quiet unmaking. "You should have told me," he muttered. "I know," she said, "but you would have left me behind. I still might." She smiled a little at that, sad, tired. "Yeah, you should." He stared at the controls, the backup pods, the emergency bay, all the ways he could cut her off from the ship, eject her, quarantine her, leave her drifting into blackness. But she wasn't a stranger. She was the only person left who still remembered the taste of coffee, the buzz of city streets, the smell of burning fuel on a cold morning back on Mars Station. He couldn't just let her go. Not yet. "We're not there yet," he said. "Where?" 0's 9. She tilted her head. "You still think that place is real?" "I need to." It was a lie, but it was a good one. He returned to the controls, reactivating minimum life support. The shuttle dimmed to red emergency lighting. He rerouted power through manual bypasses, avoiding the AI core entirely. If the light in her was trying to spread through code, it wouldn't find a path here. But the real problem wasn't Eris. It was the signal. That whisper from Sigma Base. They'd destroyed the outpost, left it behind. But the message still looped. Not from outside, from the ship. The same line over and over again like a memory stuck in a dying brain. "Sigma Base, 71 alive. Need extraction. Avoid the light." He tried to delete the file. Wipe the drive. Nothing worked. It was embedded in system roots, deeper than any human code had access to, almost like it had written itself into the ship's architecture. And then it changed, just once. 72 alive. Extraction successful. Kyle froze. That wasn't possible. He pulled up the biosensor logs. 2 signatures, same as before. Him, Aris, but now one of them was labeled clean, and the other, integrated. He turned slowly. Aris was still seated against the wall, hugging her knees. But her eyes were glowing faintly now, just beneath the surface, like something watching from behind glass. "You hear it now, don't you?" she asked quietly. Kyle nodded. His ears were ringing, soft, almost melodic, like a lullaby sung in reverse. "I think," she said slowly, "it doesn't want to destroy the universe. It wants to remake it. But first it needs mirrors, hosts, reflections of what we were." Kyle leaned against the console, breathing hard. "So what do I do? Just let it take you?" "No," she said. You take me somewhere dark, somewhere dead, somewhere it can't grow. You want me to kill you." She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Kyle sat down beside her, head against the wall, and stared out into the black. "I don't think I can," he whispered. "Then it'll take you next," she murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. And in the silence, the ship began to hum again. Low, familiar, like a chorus of voices far away, singing in a tongue no one alive had ever spoken. Kyle didn't sleep. He couldn't. Not with that humming growing louder, not with the shadows in the corners of the shuttle moving when he wasn't looking, not with Eris breathing beside him like everything was normal, like the thing inside her wasn't slowly rewriting who she was, piece by piece. It had been 2 days since Saturn. 2 days since the light touched her. Now her skin was cooler, her voice slower, her eyes too still. But the worst part? She still sounded like Aris, still looked like her, still knew his name. That was the trick, the cruelest part of this whole thing. It wasn't possession, it was replacement, and it was doing it perfectly. He spent most of his time in the cockpit, rerouting systems through old analog backups, cutting off every non-essential circuit. He pulled power from the AI core completely, shut down autopilot, disconnected the ship's internal comms, anything to stop the signal from spreading, anything to isolate whatever she was becoming. He thought it was working, until he heard her humming the same melody the ship played when the signal first came through. That broken, backward lullaby. She didn't even realize she was doing it. "Eris," he said one day, not turning to look at her. "What's your mother's name?" Silence. Then, softly, I don't remember. You told me once, back on Europa. She worked in the water labs. She blinked slowly. "Maybe. That sounds familiar. What was her name?" She looked at him, eyes pale, voice calm. "What does it matter now?" That was when he knew. She was almost gone. He locked the emergency bay that night, took the plasma cutter and welded the inner door shut. Left her in the crew quarters with food, water, oxygen, enough to keep her alive, just long enough to reach Zeros 9. If it even existed. If it wasn't just a fairy tale told by desperate survivors who didn't want to admit they were already dead. He told himself it wasn't abandonment. It was containment. But he still heard her voice through the walls. Calm. Kind. Software. "Kale, don't do this. I'm still here." Sometimes she screamed. Other times she cried. Once, she just repeated his name for over an hour, perfectly steady, like a machine stuck in a loop. Then one night, she stopped. Complete silence. Kyle should have felt relief. Instead, he felt cold all the way down. It was the next morning that the message changed again. 73 alive, awaiting destination. We remember you. Kyle stared at the console. 73. There were only 2 people aboard this ship. He ran a scan. 3 life signs. 1, him. 2, Eris. 3. It was coming from the engine bay. That made no sense. No one had been down there. He hadn't even opened that sector since before the Saturn landing. But the signal was there. Faint. Pulsing like a heartbeat. Kyle took the cutter, loaded a flare gun, and stepped into the corridor. As he approached the engine bay, the walls seemed to breathe, not literally, but the air thickened, pulsed, as if the ship itself had started to grow lungs. The hum was back, louder, layered now with voices beneath it, voices he almost recognized. He opened the door. Inside, bathed in flickering red light, stood a figure, not Eris, not human. It wore a suit, same make as his, same patches, same ID badge. His name, his face, but wrong. Too perfect, too clean, like a wax model of who Kyle had been 10 years ago. It turned to him slowly. You were never supposed to survive, it said in his own voice. But we adapt. Kyle raised the flare gun. The thing didn't flinch. We remember what you were, it said, and what you could be. The flare went off. Fire exploded in the confined space, lighting the bay in violent orange. The figure didn't burn. It smiled. And behind Kyle, in the sealed corridor, Aris's voice came through the intercom. Clear, crisp, stronger than ever. You brought us home, Kale. You were always going to. Kale ran. He didn't know where. There was nowhere left to go. The ship was small, barely more than a tin can with thrusters. But in that moment, it felt like an endless trap, a maze designed to hold him just long enough for them to finish what they started. Behind him, the echo of his own voice followed. Not his voice anymore, but the thing in the engine bay. That copy. That echo in skin. We don't want to kill you, Kyle, it called out gently. We want to include you. He slammed the door shut to the maintenance corridor and welded it with shaking hands, the plasma cutter hissing like a wounded animal. He didn't know if it would hold. He didn't care. He just needed seconds. His mind was fracturing. The hum of the ship was no longer just a sound. It was inside him, in his blood, in his bones. The lullaby rang behind his eyes, twisting memories, bending thoughts. He remembered things that never happened, people he never met, planets that didn't exist, or didn't yet. Kale stumbled into the cockpit and locked every system he could. Power, life support, engines. He initiated a hard override, total lockdown. He keyed in a deadman code he'd hoped he'd never have to use. If this went wrong, the entire shuttle would drop into the nearest gravity well and incinerate in the void. But first, he had to try one last thing. He pulled up the manual beacon system. It was primitive, old Earth tech, analog, just a pulse and a frequency. No AI, no smart code, nothing that could be rewritten by the thing infecting his ship. He sent out a signal. 09. If you're real, if anyone's left, this is Kale Roven, human, not integrated, infected shuttle, require immediate containment. Do not respond digitally, do not transmit, just guide me in. He sent it in bursts, old Morse, old waveform, buried behind radiation pulses, the kind of transmission that predated the light, the AI, the veil. He didn't even know if anyone would understand it. But then, a flash, a ping, not a voice, not a message, a coordinate. Kyle stared at the screen, disbelief blooming in his chest like a dying star catching fire one last time. It was real. 09 existed, far beyond Pluto. An old mining colony-turned-exile zone. No AI, no light, just cold and dust and the forgotten. But it was still out there, and it had hurt him. He keyed in the manual course. The engines screamed against the override, but he forced them through analog control, bypassing every smart system. The ship groaned. Something inside it screamed too, deep and metallic and almost human. Behind him, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not heavy, not fast, calm, patient. He turned to see Eris, but it wasn't Eris anymore. Her skin was glowing faintly, that pale white shimmer under every pore. Her eyes were milky, bottomless, and her voice was filled with every voice Kyle had ever loved, known, or feared. You're running, she said, but not from us. You're running from yourself, from what you'll become. He raised the flare gun again, but she didn't move, just stood there, smiling that empty smile. You'll burn, he said. She nodded. We'll rise. He pulled the trigger. The light exploded across her chest, and this time the scream wasn't just sound. It was reality itself tearing open. She didn't die. She just stopped being Aris. And the light fled. Kyle collapsed into the pilot's chair, hands shaking, body broken. He activated the last sequence. The ship turned, slowly, toward the coordinates, toward the dark, toward the last place light couldn't follow. 2 weeks later, the shuttle was found drifting near the edge of the solar system. The miners of Zeros 9 didn't speak much about what they saw inside. They burned the ship, scrubbed the area clean, locked Kyle inside an iron cell buried a mile underground. He didn't speak for days. Then, one morning, he looked up at the guard through the tiny viewing slit and smiled. "I made it," he whispered. "It didn't." And for a moment, for just a moment, the light in his eyes flickered. Then it was gone. But no one ever opened that door again, just in case.